Hey there, Tanya Roof, meetings together. Hope you made it through Domain D, Financial Management. Not as much math as you probably thought there was going to be. We had quite a few formulas. Hopefully you worked through some of those and read through the examples that the book gave you. So let's jump on in. This domain is 16 questions from the exam will come from this domain. That is 11%. So far, of all the domains that we have studied, Domain D, Financial Management, is going to be the heavily weighted domain of all that we've been through. So let's talk about it. So we started off the domain talking about how are we going to find sponsors and exhibitors, and really identifying how are we going to secure them. What is going to make them want to come to our event? What's the best way to find sponsors? Your previous ones, people that have already been your customers, already been donating or exhibiting. So that's the best place to find them. Also referrals, stakeholders, researching new ones. What is your competition doing? And then when you do find a sponsor or exhibitor, you want to send them either the sponsor prospectus or the exhibitor prospectus. And what that is basically just trying to get them to either sponsor your event or exhibit at your event. So you really want to sell your event like this is like the best thing since sliced bread, and it's going to be so great for you. You want to contribute, list all the benefits, list the ROI, do a formal letter so they can submit it for approval. Again, listing the benefits, any limitations. What are you expecting? And you also want to include a draft program of the event content. You want to make sure that your expectations are clearly outlined so everybody's on the same page. And then assigning a staff member to be responsible as a main point of contact. So you really want to make sure that this is a beneficial relationship for both parties. So if you can assign a staff member, making sure everybody's happy, everybody's on the same page, you're more likely to get exhibitors and sponsors to come back. And that's really a huge part of a lot of events and where revenue comes from. So you want to make sure that you focus on your sponsors and your exhibitors. Types of costs. So you really want to make sure that you know the difference between a fixed cost, a variable cost, and an indirect cost. Because when you're doing the formulas on the exam, it will not necessarily tell you what your fixed cost is. So you'd have to know when it says that, oh, the room rental fee is $500. You need to know, okay, that's a fixed cost. So your fixed costs are your expenses that are incurred regardless of the attendees. So your room rental fee, your marketing, insurance, signage, AV, utilities, salaries, and overhead. So anything that the price doesn't change, whether you have 5 people or whether you have 50 people. So a variable cost, that's the one that's going to change. That's the variable factor. Is if you have 5 attendees, your food and beverage bill is going to be much less than if you had 500 attendees. So the cost for food and beverage, specialty items, printing cost, overnight accommodations, other consumables, anything that is consumable is a variable cost. So remember, it varies based on the number of attendees. And then the indirect cost is not directly related to the event, but needs to be paid from somewhere, listed as overhead. So think of salaries and wages, equipment repair. So anything like the meeting planner salary. So you have a meeting planner on your staff, that's an indirect cost. It's not going to fluctuate or change based on the number of meetings that you have or anything like that. So that's an indirect cost that has to still be included, but isn't necessarily part of the event. So know the different types of costs. Okay, developing an event budget. Well, obviously we need to develop a budget. We can't just say, oh, let's have an event. So developing a budget. before you begin, you need to make sure that you, again, understand your goals and objectives, the profile of the attendees, so who's coming, and any event history. So you want to take those into consideration when you are developing your budget. But the first step, you want to remember these 4 steps to developing an event budget. The first step is to establish the meeting expenses. The second step, estimate the quantities for each budget item, forecasting realistically, and research the cost for each budget item. And if you don't have the exact dollar amount, you can use your history with a 2% inflation rate. Or if you haven't decided on a location yet, you can request menus from the hotels and give an estimated budget amount. And then step 4 is set prices to meet financial goals. So again, when you are setting your event budget, you really want to make sure you're being realistic and that you're relying on your history, on what you have spent on this particular meeting before, or using your history for number of people, things like that. So a lot of different factors go into developing your event budget, but you need to know these 4 steps. And then once you have established, it is very important to monitor and revisit. So you always want to monitoring your budget. You want to allow for 10% of your total budget for things that you didn't expect or things that came up that weren't on the budget. And the rule of thumb is 10% of your total budget. You want to monitor carefully to ensure that goals are on target. These are your key performance indicators. We want to always have our milestones that we're monitoring and making sure that our key performance indicators, that we're meeting those milestones throughout the process. Understanding how variances in the budget occurred, determine cause, identify the impact, and respond accordingly. So when you're monitoring your budget, you're really being intentional and paying attention to how things are being affected. So I used the example before with marketing, if you have taken money from the marketing budget and notice that your registration numbers are low, because you're monitoring the budget and you're following your KPIs and milestones, you can see that because you reduce the marketing budget, it's impacting your registration. So if you weren't monitoring it and you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't know. So you want to make sure you're constantly monitoring and revising. So the budget should be revised as costs are confirmed. So once we put that estimated amount in there for hotels, like, oh, okay, let's estimate that we were going to spend $50 for food and beverage. Well, we ended up booking the Phoenician, so we're going to need more than $50 a person for our costs for food and beverage. So now we can go in and revise the cost for that. Budget review frequency will depend on the scale of the event. Again, the smaller the event, the less time you need to revisit. That's goes without saying. Revise if expenses increase or decrease. Again, catering menus, depending on how far you booked, generally are locked in around 6 months before arrival. So you may have some expenses that have increased or decreased, not necessarily decreased, but you never know. And then revise for unforeseen expenses. Again, that 10% contingency, things that we weren't anticipating that maybe have come up. Maybe a new speaker that you really wanted to have at your event wasn't available when you did the budget, but now suddenly they're available. So you need more money to pay that speaker you really want. So, things like that. So again, always make sure you're monitoring and revisiting the budget. Establish cash handling. So cash handling is very important, and you always want to make sure you are establishing your guidelines before any cash exchange hands. You want to make sure that you answer these questions. Who will be responsible for specific tasks? How will duties be divided to reduce the risk of errors? What are the documentation procedures, and how will transactions be monitored? Again, because you're dealing with such large amounts of cash, even small meetings have large amounts of cash. You want to have procedures and protocols in place, and that everybody's on the same page and that everything is defined. Monitoring cash handling. Are you seeing a theme here? We don't just do things once and forget about it. We have to, once we have it in place, we monitor and you keep track, and you want to make sure that everything is going as planned. Keep a safety deposit box near registration. Hire security officers moving large amounts of money. Make deposits on a regular basis. As your attendees are checking in, if they're paying with cash or check, see about, instead of depositing into your bank, making a deposit towards the master account. Review security procedures, monitor revenue, expenses, and audit documentation. You always want to make sure that with your cash handling and your cashiers, you are both agreeing to the amount of cash that is being given, so everybody's on the same page when it comes to that cash. Okay, I kind of breezed through this pretty fast because, financial management is not an exciting and fun thing. All right, so let's look at our CMP International Standards, the CMPIS, and this is what the CMP really want us to focus on in each skill. So develop budgeting processes for funding resource management to fulfill financial goals. So this is really the identifying the sponsors and exhibitors and defining the different tiers of sponsors. We didn't really talk about that, but the title sponsors or tiered sponsorships. So know the different sponsor levels because that's going to help determine funding resources. Develop and manage the registration process through a defined system to reach established goals and targets. This subskill just talks about managing like the grant funding process. So make sure that you're familiar with grants and researching grant maker databases that identify possible different grant sources and any money that you can bring in. And also understanding how to find and research those application service providers. So remember, the registration is the first impression. So you want to make sure that it's user-friendly and that your ASP has that secure digital certificate. So your attendees' information is private and secure. Develop and manage exhibit sales process using current year space allocation to reach established goals and targets. Remember, using history and talking about the different exhibitors. You want to be familiar with market analysis and what others are doing in the marketplace, what your competition's doing. And remember that the first step is always going to be to determine the feasibility of holding the event. Manage additional revenue sources through research and analysis to reach established goals and targets. We read in the book that because of the high startup costs, that most exhibitions don't actually produce a profit for the first, 2 to 3 years? So anything you can do to find that additional revenue source is going to help that bottom line. So make sure that when you're doing your research, that you're also setting your prices accordingly and not leaving any money on the table. Develop budget using accepted accounting principles to align with the goals, objectives, and financial parameters of the event. These were the 4 steps to developing the event budget that we talked about. You want to know, again, the exact 4 steps, the different types of budgets too, like the incremental budget and zero-based budget, and which budget you should use based on, your event goals and if the event has happened before too. Establish pricing, so registration, sponsorship, exhibits, based on market analysis to meet financial target and goals. So hello, formulas. So make sure that you understand and know the break-even formula and the profit formula. what did we have? I think like 7 or 8 that we learned in this domain. So make sure that you have understood really how to plug in the fixed cost versus variable cost into those formulas. And again, knowing the difference between the two. And if you, if you're a member, you have access to all the videos that you can go through and watch how to plug in each of the formulas. And if not, there are some videos posted on my YouTube channel of a few of the formulas. So make sure that you have those formulas memorized because you will need to use them in the exam. So make sure that those are memorized. Monitor and revise budget using established audit procedures to identify potential adjustments. So we talked about how we're always monitoring the budget, right? And making adjustments and things like that. So start with projections, and as you have your actuals, you plug them in and, make things move around, make adjustments. You're always monitoring and revising that budget. So relying on your KPIs and your milestones to really help guide you. Establish monetary transaction procedures to comply with event or organization financial guidelines. So this is the establishing the cash handling procedures, maybe. You also want to know the difference between all the tools that are available for the monetary transactions, like, the income statements, balance sheets, cash flow statements, things like that. And lastly, manage monetary transaction process to confirm compliance with event or organization financial guidelines. Well, maybe this one is more the cash handling procedures and just making sure that you have your property or, your property secured and, if you've hired security lined up, things like that. And again, making sure all of those cash handling procedures are in effect and before any cash exchange hands and anything always have things planned out before any event happens. Okay, so that was domain D, domain D wrap up. I haven't had enough coffee yet this morning. Okay, so we read skills 7, 8, and 9 in the 9th edition. Read chapters 5 and 10 in PMM, domain quiz and key terms, and reviewed all formula videos, lots of formulas, and then complete domain review and time block next week. I am so excited for next week. Have you peeked ahead? Did you see this? Yes, we have 3 skills, but look, 16 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Yes. So we have such a small domain coming up, human resources, domain E. It is only 4% of the exam and it's a really quick domain. So we have all week to work on it. If you aren't caught up yet, if you're still maybe in this C or D, this is a really good week to kind of catch up, and because you will not need an entire week to go over this domain. You could probably knock this out in a day or 2. So if you have some extra time, go back, or if you're not already at E, then you can definitely catch up this week. So domain E coming up next, and that's it. All right, my friends. Well, I hope you had a great week, and I hope you didn't stress too much on the formulas and just keep practicing and make some note cards maybe for the formulas if you haven't. And hopefully that will help. But just keep showing up for yourself. It's going to be a nice, easy week ahead. And I'm so looking forward to it after this week of financial management and too much math for me. So anyways, have a fabulous weekend and keep taking those small steps forward that moves you towards the better version of you. Have a great day. Bye.